Welcome to this webinar on social dialogue for business environment reforms, insights from North Macedonia and Tunisia. I'm Séverine Debose. I work for the International Labour Organization. I'm leading the team that works on the enabling environment for sustainable enterprises, in particular for small and medium enterprises. And I'm part of the working group in the Donor Committee on Enterprise Development, which works on business environment reform. And under this group, we undertook this work on the role of social dialogue in business environment reforms. And I would like first to ask Jim from the Donor Committee to welcome all of us and to give us a little bit of overall introduction on why we are having this webinar today. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Séverine, and it's a great pleasure just to kick off this webinar and welcome to the people who've joined. I'm coordinating the Secretariat. Donor Committee is a club, in a way, of donors and UN agencies that's been working since the 70s on exchange of experience on the ground and what we learn from what we've done. So today it's a great pleasure to be having a webinar with 2 case studies where we can really learn from what's been done on the ground and what happens in terms of dialogue. We have 6 working groups, and the business environment working group is only one of them. You can see a lot more on our website if you're ever looking for stuff around private sector development. I'd recommend that. Very important theme today, very exciting. Dialogue does solve a lot of problems. Social dialogue in particular, very important to find more effective ways to reform the business environment in consultation with those who are affected by it. So I'm very excited to have this webinar today and really looking forward to it. And I'll hand back to Séverine.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you for this overall presentation and how this fits in the work of the Donor Committee. And indeed, within the working group on business environment reform in the Donor Committee, we've are usually looking at, I would say, more traditional issues related to business environment, such as, for example, investment climate, regulations. We started to look at informality. We are looking at the relation between green and business environment. And the issue of social dialogue has been chosen by the members of the working group 1 year ago, actually, with an interest and a lot of questions on how do we bring in social dialogue in the reforms process, in the private sector development, and how can we, in this club of development partners, think about the role of social dialogue in such processes. And of course, from the ILO, we thought that it would be a very interesting subject to see how we can also, what seems to be for us straightforward and an evidence, how we can discuss that with other development partners and try to identify what would work, what wouldn't work, and what would be the place of social dialogue in such reform process. And I'm going to start here by giving a small introduction on what we mean by social dialogue and obviously what we've been doing with this intent within the working group to look at social dialogue. So what we mean by social dialogue, and here I'm going to bring in the definitions from the International Labour Organization, which I represent, which is the UN specialized agency looking at world of work issues. And social dialogue is really at the, it's the ADA, and it's at the core of the ILO work, and it's really one of the key functioning dimension in everything what we do. But it's always good to go back to the basics. And how the ILO is defining social dialogue with the following characteristics. Social dialogue is any kind of negotiation, consultation, and information sharing between the representative of government and social partners. And by social partners, we mean workers and employers representatives, or it could be also between social partners, for example, again, workers and employers organization at the enterprise level. And this kind of dialogue should look at issues of common interest relating to economic and social policy. Obviously, when we look at policy-making processes, we include only the tripartite approach to social dialogue, which means, again, government, workers' organization, and employers' organization, which represent the world of work, and how they can meet, discuss, get informed, and agree on issue of the world of work on an equal footing. There's no universal model of social dialogue, and this is very important to take into account, as in each country, in each economic setting, depending also of the cultural, the historic of the country, representation might take different forms. So social dialogue might be different in terms of how it would function. But in any case, what is true in any context is that social dialogue is about governance of the world of work. So with this definition, we wanted to understand better what have been some successful examples of social dialogue in business environment reform process. What can we learn from these examples? What could be maybe some less successful examples, and what can we come up in terms of recommendations within the Donor Committee on Enterprise Development. And to do that, we decided to start with a report, a case study report that identified few country examples and brought together some of these factors and some recommendations that can be identified based on these case studies. And this is the report that one of the panelists, Alexandre, will introduce later. And based on this report, we really wanted to engage in a discussion with a broader audience and put it, I would say, in the public space and continue the discussion on what do we take from that and how do we move further. And this webinar is undertaken into that dimension and with that intent to present these results and to get some of the feedback from actors and stakeholders in the business environment world. For the webinar today, so we will have the presentation by Alexandre on the main conclusions and the main takeaways from the from the report, which has been elaborated. And then we will hear directly from two countries on what has been done in North Macedonia and in Tunisia. After this round of presentation, we will open up for a panel discussion where we will really welcome all of your questions and reactions to the panelists, but also in terms of what you think we should take forward and as a feedback to us in the donor committee. We are planning to have a 1 hour and a half webinar, so we will finish in about 1 hour and 15 minutes. And of course, please feel free to either write through the question and answers button your questions, or then to raise your hand for taking the floor after the presentations. With this being said, I would like to introduce the first panelist, Alexandre, who will present the report. Alexandre is the founder and chairman of the Multipolarity Report. He has 20 years of professional experience in financial and in strategic advisory, macroeconomic analysis, and public policy. He delivers support and advice to governments, to financial institutions, to multinational corporations, and also to UN-affiliated agencies including actually has been working also in the ILO, in particular for our colleagues that provide support on social dialogue in our member countries. He's currently teaching also, teaching and acting at Sciences Po in Paris, and he's writing a number of very important economic articles that you can find also in the media, especially in France. He speaks fluently French, Russian, English, and Arabic, and can also interact in Spanish and German. So in case you are short of language for expression, I think you can interact with Alexandre quite easily. Alexandre, I'm going to give you the floor for a presentation and insights on the report. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Séverine, for this very kind introduction. Indeed, I was tasked with drafting this first report on the embedding of social dialogue in business environment reforms, and this was a very interesting and challenging task. Interesting because indeed, as it happens, social dialogue now is really becoming ubiquitous in different reform and policy agendas in many countries on the ground, and very successfully applied sometimes to drive reforms at the national or local level. Challenging because, as you might imagine, there is very few formal assessment of the role of social dialogue in such business-oriented reform frameworks. And the main challenge was indeed coming up with some methodological insights and applying them to a few case studies in order to draw some very preliminary and tentative conclusions. So just to give you a flavor of the methodology that you could read in detail in the draft report, basically the idea was to try to assess the role of social dialogue and its contribution within the BER reform framework in two different ways. First, as an enabler of some outcomes of business environment reforms. And as you can imagine, the outcomes and functional areas that are most relevant to social dialogues, like labor laws and work conditions or workers' conditions, are the most readily addressed by social dialogue in this case. And through the case studies, and I think my colleagues later will on that. There have been very interesting application of this social dialogue framework to these issues that are directly relevant to workers and the workers' representatives. The other way to address the contribution of social dialogue to this reform, this dialogue actually can enhance and serve as a catalyst of the overall reform process. And this is maybe more conceptual, but it's also, I think, more interesting that to look just at the narrow, outcomes-focused approach. Because here, what is meant is that social dialogue can be embedded within large reform frameworks, including at the national level, And we have seen that with many examples of tripartite dialogue format that have been applied on national levels in different countries in the world to drive, to design actually and implement and monitor large-scale reforms, including business environment reforms. And here it's very interesting to see that the lessons that we really learned from these few initial case studies was really the focus on consensus building and the focus on the initial design phase of the reforms, where you are tasked with achieving a consensus between different stakeholders with sometimes diverging objectives, and you need to achieve this consensus on the overall direction of the reforms, on the priorities, and on basically how you will implement this reform, the kind of mechanism to implement the reform and to validate these reforms by all the stakeholders. So I think this is really one of the key interesting insights coming from this initial work, the importance of social dialogue as an instrument in achieving this consensus from the start in a challenging environment. The other insight that was driven from this report was the importance of transferring the skills and the overall mechanism that were implemented during the interventions to the local stakeholders, so that actually the dialogue process that started sometimes in an ad hoc fashion between these stakeholders could, be something more permanent, and it could really go on forward without the help of the initial organizations that were leading this process, agencies that were putting together all these resources. So this is both a challenge and a direction to explore, as to see how to transfer these skills and these resources to the main stakeholders. Finally, I think it's important to elaborate really on I think the issue of data and of especially of monitoring data is really important, because I think what is lacking in many projects and what I've seen running through the documentation is the lack of really applicable metrics that could be used to evaluate the role of social dialogue, or for what that matter of any other intervention framework on the outcomes of the reforms in a focused and targeted manner. I think there is a lot of work to do in this area to try to relate the impact of the different interventions and frameworks to the outcomes themselves, but on the process of the reforms where actually social dialogue, for example, plays an even more important role than in the outcomes approach, which is maybe too narrowly focused on some issues. So I think this was to wrap up some of the conclusions of the report, and I'm at your disposal to elaborate very much.
Thank you very much, Alexandre. We just a technical detail. We had to stop your video because your brand yeah, the internet was not so good,
Okay,
but
no
I think
problem.
no, that's okay. I think we could have, however, catch what you were saying in terms of the main messages. Again, in terms of social dialogue as an instrument for achieving consensus, in terms of social dialogue that allows a transfer of skills to local stakeholders, and getting some people and some institutions to start talking, and then that can be transferred, even though the people would give would be some other people afterwards. Or again, also in terms of monitoring data, and that's just a very, very quick summary. And we will have, of course, time to come back on these various points in the discussion. I would like now to give the floor to Natasha, who is actually a colleague of the ILO, working for the ILO in North Macedonia. And sorry, she's based in Skopje, and she's implementing, yes, a number of projects in North Macedonia. She has been involved in particular in a project that looks at how to enhance social dialogue, both at national and local levels. And on that occasion, we had some very exciting and good cooperation with Natasha, where we looked at how we can indeed promote the enabling environment within a social dialogue forum in North Macedonia. She's previously to the ILO. She worked as a project manager in the private sector, and while managing ILO projects, Natasha is still finishing also an MBA degree, and she's quite busy with all of that. Natasha, the floor is you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Severin, for your kind introduction. And also I would like to use this opportunity to thank you for recognizing the efforts of North Macedonia on its way forward in trying to establish better environment for business development. For my presentation, I have prepared some slides, and I would like to ask Ella to share them. Okay, thank you very much. So this is the case actually of North Macedonia. First slide, please. Usually when I deliver some presentation, I first try to make the audience aware of where Macedonia is. It is located in the Balkans Peninsula. It's a landlocked country. It's a very small country. Hence, not everybody is always aware of its position and existence. So first of all, before going on how social dialogue can assist in the business environment reform, I would like to inform you about how the social dialogue is established in the country. So it has a tripartite structure, could be institutionalized through the economic and social councils, where members are the government plus the representative organizations of employers and trade unions. This economic and social council was established initially in 1996, but because of some membership issues, it didn't function well. So it was then revitalized in 2010. Ever since, the economic and social council is working continually and is mainly focused on economic, labor, and social issues. In the past year, the International Labour Organization has tried to support the economic and social councils, plus to support its members in advancing and enhancing their role and also their advocacy and their visibility. Next slide, please. So how did we start it? The Enabling Environment for Sustainable Enterprises was initially launched in 2013, and it was mainly addressing the issues or the problems that the employers have in the country. So the main beneficiaries were the Organization of Employers of Macedonia and the Business Confederation of Macedonia. The objective of this analysis of this research was to identify the key areas that are limiting the favorable business environment, that is the main business killers. Among the 17 existing pillars, it identified the 5 ones that hinder the business development and business growth in the country. So it was an extensive, comprehensive research that was based on interviews, survey, and focus groups, and which is very positive. At that time, the recommendations that were made based on this research were integrated in the economic reform program of the country, which the employers' organization thought it is a very positive step further in their advocacy efforts. Next slide, please. Based on this, building upon these findings and recommendations, the employers' organization made a step further, and with the support of the International Labour Organization, they managed to use these findings and these conclusions and recommendations that were integrated into the first EAST report, and they tried to draft or to further detail their policies, policy proposals. So they developed 5 policy papers on the selected topics. They used these policy papers to advocate for better conditions for business running in the country, but also they used them as a tool to improve their visibility among the government, Economic and Social Council, and plus the other stakeholders in the country. Next slide. The next step in the enabling environment for sustainable enterprises was undertaken in 2019, when it was decided that this entire program or concept for business reform, for business environment reform, will be taken under the umbrella of the Economic and Social Council. This was in a way a twofold, it had a twofold objective. First, it was for the Economic and Social Council to engage proactively in promoting the initiatives, but also through these business environment reforms to contribute to inclusive growth and job creation. The enabling environment for sustainable enterprises was put under the auspices of the Economic and Social Council in order to increase the relevance of the council, but also to ensure commitment by all the parties that are involved in the social dialogue. And also its role was to monitor the implementation of the roadmap, which should have been the final product of the entire process. Therefore, an update of the report on enabling environment for sustainable enterprises was done. It was concluded that all the identified 5 topics are still relevant, and that some additional proposals and recommendations should be provided. Next slide. But also during this period, we have identified that major results have been accomplished through the through involving the social dialogue or the Economic and Social Council in this business environment reform. First of all, there was the revision of the public procurement law, labor law, taxation policies, and SME support programs. And this was done in the period from 2017 to 2019, and it was done based on the policy papers. But also there were other laws and policies that were reformed through social dialogue, and this is a continual process, and this has been now a practice since it has been identified that the social dialogue can highly contribute, because if you have the commitment from all the parties, then things can be easily resolved, or a consensus can be better made, and there is of course that are the best grounds for social peace. So in the current period, there have been major reforms conducted, and this is the law on labor relations, the law on amicable settlement of labor disputes, and the introduction of the mechanism for settlement of labor disputes, then the law on employment and insurance in case of unemployment, the law on minimum wage, and then also the employment and social reform program, the economic reform program, the national employment strategy, and the national strategy curbing the informal economy. All these topics, all these laws and policies contribute to reducing the reducing the obstacle to the businesses, and all of these were recognized in the researches that were made on identification of the business killers. Next slide, please. However, not everything has been so positive. In the past period, the country has faced a number of crises, as the world. So the challenges to the implementation of the business environment reform have been, first of all, the COVID-19 and the crisis that it induced. First, the health crisis with all the measures that have been imposed, and then the follow-up economic, the subsequent economic crisis. So now, when we were dealing with the issues of the major issues that were of interest to the businesses in the country, first of all, the access to finance, and then the improvement of the entrepreneurial culture, the COVID appeared, and these were put aside, if I may say like that, because the access to finance was initially discussed in the context of innovation or introduction of new technology and growth of the enterprises. But then with the COVID, the access to finance, which was primarily provided by the government, it was always related to the survival of the companies. So even though this roadmap was accepted and endorsed by the Economic and Social Council and then presented to the government, it couldn't have been implemented in the way that it was imagined in the beginning, because there was this COVID-19 induced crisis. But then when we thought that everything would go fine after the recovery from the COVID, now we are hit by the energy crisis. And once again, people do not want to take the risk of going or starting up their own businesses. So this is again a hindrance to the entrepreneurial culture, because they do not know how the future will look, but also the access to finance is again, the focus of the access to finance is again towards getting money from the government in order for the companies to survive, and not to get finance in order for the company to further grow. So we hope really, because still these things are relevant, we really do hope that after this, after we survive this crisis, after we overcome these challenges, that the business environment reform roadmap will be implemented, and it is still under the auspices of the Economic and Social Council. So we hope that the monitoring by the three parties that are involved in the Economic and Social Council or in the tripartite social dialogue in the country will contribute to better implementation and to better results. Thank you. So I will be, this is initially presentation of how the case worked in the country, and afterwards I can discuss other issues related to the Macedonian context. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Natasha, and also for linking to some of the other topics that we are developing on business environment, linked obviously to fragility and resilience. and how policy processes can also continue or at least not take a full halt in crisis situations. So thank you so much, Natasha. And I'm going now to move us all towards Tunisia, and we'll ask Lucas to make a presentation on the case study that was presented in Tunisia. Lucas is a development expert in labor and employment policies with some expertise, a specific expertise in social dialogue and industrial relations. Since 2020, talk about COVID, he has been heading a multi-partnership program for the GIZ, which aims at better using the potential of social dialogue to promote employment in Tunisia, a project which is financed by the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. Before that, Lucas worked in various positions on that were related to development assistance, vocational training, livelihood interventions, with also a keen expertise and interest in fostering trade union cooperation and democracy in various Asian countries. He was named as a 2020 Resina Young Fellow by the Observer Research Foundation, and he holds two diplomas from Germany, one in political science and one in public administration and management from the University of Leipzig. And so Lucas is going to talk to us about Tunisia. Thank you so much, Lucas.
Thank you, Severine. And thank you also for giving us the opportunity to present our project that we have been implementing here. Actually, overall since end of 2017, a project that was indeed focusing on social dialogue for employment. A project implemented by GIZ, donc the Deutsche Gesellschaft für internationale Zusammenarbeit, that was funded by, as you mentioned, the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, BMZ, that also on behalf of which GIZ is active in the DCED. So I'm going to run you through a journey of 4 years in 15 minutes. Bear with me, it will be fast, it will be brief, but I hope it will be interesting. So the project was called Alliance for Economic Development and Employment in Tunisia / Social Dialogue, a project of 5.2 billion, 4 years and 3 months of implementation, a project that was not implemented by GIZ alone, but was really a multi-stakeholder approach from both sides, the German side, but also the Tunisian side. And I'm going to explain you in a second why and how. Next slide, please. Before I start, just a brief framework for intervention. So as you know, in the aftermath of the Arab Spring in 2011, also the social partners in Tunisia received even the Peace Nobel Prize for its role in the aftermath of the Arab Spring. And they have been quite active in the aspect of social dialogue. And one core document for us, for our intervention, has been indeed the document, the social contract, that was established in 2013 and was signed also, as you see in the picture, with the presence of the back then General Secretary of the ILO. So in this document, it's a brief document, and there are many aspects that has been mentioned. I will focus on 4 because these are the 4 that we have also been using to design and implement our project. One was the institutionalization of social dialogue through a National Council for Social Dialogue, Conseil National du Dialogue Social, CNDS. The other aspect was related to the question of how to strengthen employability in the country where we have a lot of unemployment, especially in the youth, especially even in the youth that are graduates from university and so forth. The third element is an interesting one because it was agreed in this document that the social partners together with the government will come up with a proposal for the setting up of an unemployment insurance scheme, you may say. And can we have all the slides? You'll see the slides, I guess, I hope. Yeah, and the fourth one is related to the question of the migration from informal work to formal work settings. So these were the 4 interventions. Next slide, please. Exactly. So the main objective, and I quote, no, what's back? Thanks. The social partners are increasingly making better use of the potential of social dialogue to promote employment. In particular, the capacity of the implementation partners to negotiate and design employment policies in a tripartite structure has been strengthened. I want to come back to our partner side. So I mentioned it, we were not the only one. So basically the German side said, okay, what kind of actually partnerships do we have already? And obviously the German corporation GSZ has very good relations to the public side, but we also then said, okay, let's do partner with actors, German actors that are on the ground and have good relations to the social partners. One was the German political foundation Friedrich Ebert, close to the Social Democratic Party in Germany, that have very good relations to the unions. We also partnered up with the political foundation Konrad Adenauer Stiftung that have a good expertise and relations with the private sector, but also with universities and so forth. And finally, also the German Chamber of Commerce here in Tunisia, which has a lot of membership here in Tunisia. And finally, also in a later stage, we had a good cooperation with the ILO. That is the international side, if you want so. And from the Tunisian side, obviously the 3 social partners, the most representative organizations from the union and the employer side, as well as the government. Next slide, please. So the main objectives in a nutshell: enhancing the potential of social dialogue for employment security and promotion, strengthening the capacity of the social partners to jointly develop employment solutions, guarantee their commitment to promote employment and social dialogue, and also strengthening the capacity of the state representative to involve with the social partners and other stakeholders in the development of employment solutions. Next slide, please. How did we do this? We worked in pairs. So basically, for instance, the Friedrich Ebert Foundation with the union, we with the government and so forth, but we also set up tripartite working groups. And I will run you through 3 of them and then talk about the CNDS as well. So next slide, please. So the first working group we set up was the working group related to the question of employability, occupational training, and reintegration. We brought together all the main stakeholders from the public, as well as the private, as well as the trade union side. And we did basically throughout mainly 2 years, we realized quite a few interesting aspects. We had a bottom-up process for job seekers, how to improve their employability. We had different studies also related to COVID, because rightfully COVID was the last couple of years quite relevant. Also for social dialogue, as you can imagine, we had developed indicators for employability in Tunisia and so forth and so forth. Next slide, please. The second technical working group was tackling the aspect of the question of the transition of informal to formal work. And there we again brought together the right people. We were able to agree on the definition of the ILO recommendation 2004, which was already important to have the common ground for what we talk about. And then we said, okay, let's look into some specific sectors and specifically into some region where these sectors are quite prone, such as construction, textile, and so forth. And let's organize tripartite, a series of tripartite workshops where these people can come together and specifically discuss and then come up with specific recommendations how to moderate this transition in their respective sector. And it was quite an interesting approach. We thought, and the first aspect I mentioned here is something we are continuously doing at the moment. There are some laws and regulations that can be used also to basically moderate the transition. For instance, there's a new law on social and solidarity economy in Tunisia, and it is something we are working on also right now. Next slide, please. Finally, the third working group is related or was related to this planned national unemployment insurance scheme. That was a quite interesting and a quite difficult approach. First of all, we had to define on what was mentioned in the social contract document, what is actually unemployment for economic reason. That was already quite difficult. Then it's a very political discussion, as you can imagine, high-level discussions. What we did, we basically used a software-based approach, where basically first separately the three parties kind of were able to develop their own agenda, how such a unemployment scheme could look like. What are the contribution? How long you need to pay? How it should be governed, and so forth and so forth. And then later on, we brought this together, and we had obviously not 100%, but we had quite a good overlap. And based on this, the respective or the responsible Ministry for Social Affairs came up with a first draft of a bill for such an employment scheme. Unfortunately, we could not bring this any further so far because there had been quite some political changes here in Tunisia, as you might be aware of. But nevertheless, that was quite an interesting approach and a successful one as well, I would say. Next slide, please. And the fourth element I mentioned earlier in the social contract was indeed the institutionalization of the social social dialogue through the National Council of Social Dialogue. That was really groundwork because it was newly established. It is a council with 105 members, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. It acts as a consultative body that must be consulted in legislation procedures related to socioeconomic laws and decrees. There are some optional consultation processes. You can even get active independently. So this so far, it has a board, it has a turning presidency between the General Secretary of the Union, the President of the Employers Federation, and the Minister. It has here, we jointly work together with the ILO. What we did here, we trained the commission. They had technical working commissions, tripartite, obviously, for industrial relations, for social protection, and other topics. We helped them to set up and equip even the headquarters. You see a small picture there, it's quite a big one, and other elements to make this organization operational. I can later on talk about the challenges we had here. Next slide, please. So before I stop, and I'm coming to an end, and I will be quick here because it's not the core of our discussion, just a few words on our working in pairs, so the bilateral work. Next slide, please. So our four German organizations, they partnered up, as I mentioned already, with their respective counterparts. And that was quite an interesting and successful approach. As you see here in the slide, there have been many people being trained. So basically the capacity building for all three actors really we overachieved, if you want. So we have this trade union academy that was established, and a lot of people have been trained. We had also an academy for the employers. We had a work with HR managers, with the young CGDs, is the young organization of the Federation, Employers Federation, and so forth. One element I want to highlight here as well is the work we did with the university, ESSEC, where implemented through the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, they established indeed a chair for social dialogue. So now in Tunisia, you can make a master in social dialogue. And then finally, obviously, our work directly with the Ministry of Social Affairs, but also with the Ministry of Employment and Vocational Training. We did quite a lot of capacity buildings, including for the labor inspectorates, and the labor inspectorates, which are under the social ministry, do play a crucial role also when it comes to social dialogue on the enterprise level. Next slide, and directly next one, just an impression of some of the products we did. It's not even complete, one back, just a lot of manuals, very concrete aspects, and things, not only studies, but also hands-on products that can be used by the social partners. And now finally, my conclusion, lessons learned from Tunisia. So I would argue social dialogue as a method to realize social accepted and sustainable reform can work. It is quite challenging, especially in Tunisia. So definitely a rather long-term commitment is crucial because decision-making can be delayed. And I think this is the case in all countries. When it comes to the question on which approach, more institutional, more informal way, I guess a good mix is what we did and what was quite, I think, good. So we supported the actual institution for national social dialogue, but we also worked like semi-institutional through tripartite working groups on a project level that naturally will come to an end when the project comes to an end. But also I would argue very crucial is the informal talks and so forth. Otherwise, because trust is the currency used in social dialogue. The last points are related to the question how social dialogue can work in terms of crisis. We have the COVID crisis that obviously was quite challenging throughout the world. There we realized it can work. So some short-time allowances have been able, they have been able to agree upon in the early stage in 2020. But it's also related to the, so you see, for instance, here I say, times of crisis might be times of executive power. This is indeed something we see here in Tunisia at the moment. So, but again, it's very country specific. Tunisia is also a unique case. The labor union has a strong position here, much more than in other countries I've seen. But I hope I've been able to show you that it is quite an interesting approach. And I'm arguing that it should be used much more often. Thank you from my side for the moment.
I need to unmute, if not, that will not work. Thank you so much, Lucas, for this presentation. I want now first to open the floor to the participants or even to reactions by the panelists on the presentation and what we've heard. To do that, please raise your hand with the button which is in the more at the bottom of the screen, or in the question and answers you can also ask the questions. So in case you would have some questions, please be free. And I'm also happy to see that, and I want to mention Beata and Stefan, Beata from the European Commission and Stefan from the GIZ, who are also in the task force from the working group in the donor committee that worked on this stream of social dialogue and business environment, and that were also very supportive and putting their brains and energy in doing this piece of work. So in case there are some questions, some reactions, I know it's always difficult to be the first one, so I'm going to give you a few seconds to be bold enough. If not, I will ask some of my questions, but I want first to give the opportunity. No one is bold enough. Okay, so maybe I will start with asking some questions. And this is first a question both for Natasha and for Lucas. In terms of sustainability of business environment reform, which has been done through social dialogue. So we hear obviously from Natasha also how some of the processes have been put on hold due to crisis, whether it's COVID or energy crisis, etc. But I would be interested if you of your reflection. And again, I mean, it's we don't want any commitment and we're not going to take it for granted. But do you think a business environment process has better chance of sustainability if it was embedded in a dialogue process, or you know, we should consider that sometimes just imposing from governments or from the state or from one part might have better chance of being in a long-term sustainable. So this is both for Natasha and for Lucas, and I see Lucas putting already his video, which might mean that you want to take the floor. So Lucas, you go first, and then I will give the floor to Natasha. Yeah.
As you wish, Natasha, if you want to go first. Go ahead. Okay. Thank you, Severin. Yeah, the question of sustainability of, I mean, maybe first of all, related to the sustainability of a project, and then maybe on a more broader way you asked. I think social dialogue can contribute to knowledge building and capacity development among local partners. This was indeed one of the strengths, I guess, of the social dialogue project here in Tunisia. I have not put too much focus on the work that has been done on this bipartite setting up of the different German and Tunisian partners, but there indeed a lot of capacity has been done. You might have seen some of the numbers of several thousands of people have been trained and capacity was built up. Also to mention again this chair for social dialogue and so forth. So there, I would really argue that it can be made more sustainable. What I also did not mention is that what we tried and did partially, but due to COVID, it was not as much as we had hoped. The exchange with the German social partners and the German government and actors. For instance, in the discussion of the unemployment scheme, we had extensive discussion with the German Federal Ministry of Labor and Social Affairs and the Federal Employment Agency that is responsible in Germany. So, and we also had exchange with the German social partners, and really to kind of exchange knowledge and so forth in order to make it more sustainable. In a more broader way, your question related to sustainability of social dialogue in relationship to this business environmental reform approach, I think it is quite crucial, right? I mean, we brought together here what belongs together, right? Private sector has its natural interest to push for reforms that are in favor of its business environment. Yeah, this is lobby work. This is natural. But when you think about a more sustainable, a more forward-looking approach, then you cannot do it without labor. You cannot do it. You cannot do business responsibly and sustainable if you don't approach the labor side. And in the long run, this is the only way to success.
Thank you, Lucas, for this very strong position in favor of the beauties of social dialogue. Natasha?
Okay, so this is my 8th year dealing with social dialogue, and I can talk about the Macedonian case and say that huge developments have been made and huge progress have been made through the years. This is also dependent on the capacity building of the social partners. However, when more parties are involved into something, then we can have a stronger commitment and then better results. So the process is not that easy. For example, for instance, there have been throughout the years bipartite social dialogue, including the government with the employers discussing the tax policy, some industrial policies and stuff like that. Then there were bipartite social dialogue between the workers and the employers organization discussing through collective bargaining their topics of interest, and also government and trade unions discussing some workers related issues. But what witnessed to be the best approach is the tripartite social dialogue involving all the parties, because in that case we always end up with consensus, and when there is a consensus, there is a stronger will and stronger obligation for the parties to implement what they have committed to. Sometimes there are trade-offs, but that's the way life goes. Some argue that I've read a lot in the years that social dialogue increases the costs and leads to, I don't know, increasing of longer procedures, more expenses involved. However, I think that I believe that the social dialogue is strong. So it's not because the dialogue has over 100 years of experience, and it is true that if we have social dialogue and consensus, then we can have more stability and social justice, of course. So this is also relevant in terms of business environment reforms, because if we have conditions or policies that are that improve workers' conditions as well, then we can have more productivity, which on the other hand will have benefits to provide benefits to the enterprises and the business sector. So this is a circle that goes on and on. Currently, we are faced with a lot of crises, especially in the last decade, starting with the financial crisis in 2008-9, then the COVID crisis, now with the energy crisis. And we've seen that the social dialogue has been used as an innovative, not innovative, but it has been used as a steady a driver of some reforms or in finding ways out of this crisis. So sometimes new radical measures are not needed, but we should look after something that has proven to be useful and well established into the past, and use it in an innovative way that is more compliant with the new context and labor market and economy situation. And also, I believe that social dialogue at enterprise level can also very much contribute towards these towards better improvement and growth of the companies, because there has been one research that I've gone through, and which says that wherever there is a social dialogue at an enterprise level, the workers are more willing to accept the reforms that are to be established, to be pushed by the enterprise. So a case in Macedonia was that during the COVID, the first measures that were proposed by the government. So these were the measures that the government was intended to support the companies, the economy, and the workers. So it were only proposed by the government. So then there was some opposition by the employers. Then the government consulted the employers only, and the chambers of commerce and the employers organization. But there was some oppositions from the workers organization or the trade union. So when all the three parties were involved in these things, then we had really relevant and applicable measures that were to the benefit of everybody. Because in one thing leads to another, as I mentioned before, and this can be a good lesson learned for some other reforms in the future that are to be implemented or suggested. So we should always take into account the responses in the crisis and learn the best lessons in order to replicate them in other situations, in other contexts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Natasha. And both of your answers, Lucas and Natasha, gave me the will to ask a question to Alexandre. And I'm going to ask that question to Alexandre. who can have time to think about the response while Lucas can respond to the question of Edouard, if that's fine with you. But I'm going to ask this question to Alexandre, and I might take him a little bit by surprise. But I would like to know whether you think there would be some areas of business environment and or some context when the advice to the government should be actually don't try too much to open it to social dialogue. So we know it's more complicated. I mean, you know, it's longer, yeah, it takes more time. So are there some conditions or some areas of the business environment that actually might be better or might open up for saying, okay, on that one, maybe you can just, you know, don't consider that social dialogue is key. So I'm putting this question to Alexandre, maybe Lucas and Natasha, you can also think about that. And I will also let Lucas responding to the question by Edouard. And Edouard, do you want to take the floor and ask the question directly, even though it's already in the Q&A, but we like to hear also participants. If you want to unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
No, I think it has been responded to, but it would be interesting to know if there is a role of the government. I would just, in a political setting, I would like to understand what should be the role of the government, because I know partners are working to support governments, and if they are supporting governments, then I think there should be some kind of alignment. And I would just wanted to hear, in the context of Arab Spring, what should be the role of the government. So this is important because when it comes to employment, it's something which is critical, and then everybody's looking at trying to create wealth in order to achieve also the peace and stability. So this is not something that we can underestimate. It's something that we have to look at. And I think the most important thing also is to look at how do we try to enable the environment to be able to facilitate the creation of small business in order to reduce poverty. Over to you. Thank you.
A tough one, I guess. I understand in your written question, you also refer to EESU. I guess you refer to enabling environment for sustainable enterprises. Is that right? Maybe I try to combine it, because the first one is, what is the role of the government? Well, the role of the government is to set standards, to set laws, to set regulations, to enable also dialogue, to enable social dialogue, to implement the international labor standards that allow them the unions to organize, the businesses to make their business, to have laws that are also implemented and so forth, to give them the role they need. That is basically the absolute minimum role of a government, the way I understand. On top of that, this may not be enough. So also the role may be also to provide some sort of social security, some social security systems, and so forth, that provide the people working in the country, the workers, and so forth, to have some sort of minimum social security system in place. So this is the role of the government. And when it comes to social dialogue, to tripartite social dialogue, then obviously this is all on the table and to be negotiated with the social partners, how to do it together. Because as we heard also from Natasha, that it can only be sustainable, it can only be well, you create ownership when you bring together the social partners. Then there you can have hundreds of good examples in many countries in the world, how this, well, and in the ILO can basically bring them even to the international level. In the question of the Arab Spring, I guess the question of social dialogue is a bit different. Maybe it was, and it was also discussed by Alexandre in the study, is the question of national dialogue. So basically, where the social partners also, but also other stakeholders, can play a role to really on a national dialogue level when it comes to new political systems. Here in Tunisia, we just had a change of a constitution and so forth, or back then the revolution. That's where also the social partners, but also other actors can play a crucial role. And in the case of Tunisia, they are quite strong. So they do play this very political role, which is going beyond just their interest representing either the workers or the employers in the business side. Maybe just one last answer, if that was really what you meant with the EESE. So basically the question of what social dialogue can play when it comes to environmental reforms. Maybe there it's the time to bring in the word just transition. Just transition for all, that was something that was brought into the ILO context some maybe 8-10 years ago or so, if I remember correctly, through the unions. It's a bit counterintuitive because people may think, well, the unions, they are usually not in favor of a transition that may cost some, well, will lead eventually to the letdown of workers and so forth. But no, so they did, I guess, and we are all talking about just transition at the moment. So basically, especially in the context of how to industry based on technology and renewable energy, right? And there, actually, social dialogue again is quite crucial, because you need to upskill workers, you need to moderate it, you need to discuss with the employers how to arrange this, because if you don't, then we are in a situation most likely of social unrest. So basically, I guess there's no alternative to it.
Thank you very much, Lucas. It seems that I have some maybe low quality connection. I hope it's only on my end. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Good.
Yes.
Then I'm going to give the floor to Alexandre so that he can tell us what he thinks in terms of when maybe we should not pay so much attention to social dialogue. I mean, does that exist? Can we even consider it?
Thank you, Severin. I think indeed there are cases where social dialogue, as it is conventionally defined, would not be the most readily applicable standard or framework to drive reforms or to achieve some outcomes. And I think of two situations in which this is not the case. The first situation, which is encountered in many developing countries, is where there is no institutionalized framework of social dialogue. So actually, either because of the labor market is very fragmented and dominated by informality, or either from other reasons, because, for example, the executive power does not recognize the role of social dialogue or does not want to allow it to expand. So in these cases, I think realistically, you cannot really refer to this kind of dialogue between representatives of workers, representatives of the business community, business owners, and the government as something that would be effective in driving either the overall reform agenda or achieving some outcomes in some specific areas, including in the areas where actually indeed the participants themselves, the business community, the business owners, for example, don't see why they should ask the workers their point of view. I'm referring, for example, to FDI and other investment promotion policies, which are basically more related to bringing investors and developing the private sector by allowing more capital to come in the country. And in this case, for example, maybe social dialogue would not be the best and most efficient way to achieve that. Although in some cases, as you can discover in the report, this was actually a byproduct of the initiatives. For example, in the case of Ghana, in which actually the tripartite coordination mechanism achieved this kind of consensus on the need to promote FDI and to raise awareness among the workers about the positive benefits of FDI. But this is more an exception than the general rule. The other second situation in which I think social dialogue might not be the best platform is where you actually already have some kind of coordination mechanisms, and these mechanisms are more effective. As Lucas mentioned, I refer to national dialogue in the report as one of the competing or complementary frameworks to social dialogue. And we know that national dialogue, especially in post-crisis situation, in nation building initiatives and so on, from Iraq to Afghanistan to other countries, this is something that would be more, comprehensive, because it includes not only the point of view of the workers, business owners, and government, but also many other interests that are not reflected in the conventional social dialogue framework. So basically, I think we should be realistic about the potential of social dialogue to solve all the problems and all the issues that are faced by the country and the government and business owners. But at the same time, I think the potential has clearly not been explored as it should be, and there is a lot of areas in which actually social dialogue can bring some positive contribution, including in some surprising frameworks and situations. For example, to reduce informality, and this can be achieved by pairing existing formal business organization and unions with their counterparts in the so-called informal economy, and to make sure that the people working in the informal economy are getting a voice to these reforms, although they are not represented by traditional, workers' associations and unions. And there are many other cross-cutting issues, actually, I think, that are addressed by the DCED Business Environment Committee that could be also explored. For example, the issue of climate change, issue of gender and minorities, in which social dialogue can also bring a positive contribution by giving its own, facilitation to solve these issues.
Thank you very much, Alexandre, for this response. And maybe I want also to open now to Natasha and Lucas on the same question in your context, where you would, in your interaction with the policymakers and the social partners, might say, well, listen, I mean, maybe in that extent, we just maybe leave it aside, or let's see how to be more, in an efficient way. Natasha.
May I?
Yeah.
I was losing Alexandra a bit during his talk, but if I understood well, that he mentioned that in the promotion of the FDIs, the government should provide should provide good conditions in order to attract the FDIs. Am I right?
Yes, that's
Okay.
right, actually. And I think I was also mentioning the experience of Macedonia, or what I heard from what we discussed. It was interesting in that regard.
Yeah, but I would comment on this, saying that in one of the topics that were selected as identified as limiting the businesses in the country was actually this one, because the government in our country, without any social dialogue in the past, provided better conditions and some subsidies to the foreign investors, which the domestic business owners consider to be unfair competition, creating unfair competition. So yeah, this is maybe in a way a good practice in order to attract them, because with foreign investors, foreign direct investments, new jobs will be created, new technologies and innovation will be introduced. However, it might have other consequences. I cannot now think of a topic where social dialogue should not be involved. Maybe I would mention only the tax policy, but yeah, here again, it will have consequences. So any economic policy law or labor-related policy strategy law has consequences both on the employers and and if not directly, indirectly, it has consequences for the workers as well. So maybe on some topics, there should be a mandatory social dialogue, for example, where the voice of the workers and the employers should be equally heard, or to be on the same footing as we use it in the ILO jargon. But on some topics, maybe they should be just to have less significant role, if I can say so, to be informed on or only consulted. But really, I cannot think of a context. But also, but I wanted to mention this about the foreign direct investments. And another thing is, yes, I think that social dialogue can also help fighting the informality, because both employers and workers will benefit from having everything formalized. Thanks.
Thank you, Natasha. Lucas, yeah. We don't
say again.
No, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Maybe not just to say everything again that was mentioned, which I agree upon by Natasha. Well, we had asked ourselves also within GSZ the question of when a project or an approach to include a social dialogue in a project, design, is the right approach, and that is also not quite obvious. Maybe there it depends on the context, right? As it is, it really depends also on the national context, whether it helps you to achieve your project aims when you open up like this social dialogue approach. Yeah. So, and I think there it depends. It depends in which direction you want to go, how specific your project objectives are, and then in some circumstances this may not be the right approach. In others, yes. So this is basically something that needs to be well studied, and then but I guess it is a good idea to in the design of a project to really see whether this can be implemented, because it has this sustainability aspect we just said. It can make structural changes, it can create ownership and so forth. So that's why in the more long run, I guess this is always the better option. But yeah, if you think obviously in project cycles and you need to achieve your objectives, well, then it depends a bit, yeah, to be quite honest. Yeah, so this is my comment to that.
Thank you so much, Lucas. And I see Alexandre raising your hand, Alexandre. So I'm going to give you the floor, Alexandre. And then if you have also last thoughts as we are coming towards the end of this webinar, I just want to open up also for last thoughts on maybe what have you learned also in terms of the process, and for the three speakers, if there was something that you would recommend in terms of for the donor committee and for the working group on something to dig further or something to take forward for the further discussion within the group, what would that be in terms of the role of social dialogue? That would be really useful for us. And I give you 30 seconds each. Thank you.
Thank you, Serene. Just one reaction on what was said by Lucas and Natasha. I agree fully with them. I think the main point here is the priority and the sequencing of the interventions in context where you have this social dialogue framework that exists on the national level. For example, the gold standard being for me the Scandinavian countries. As you know, then everything is looked through the lens of social dialogue. Every reform is implemented, designed and implemented through these lenses. So this is a no-brainer. But in other contexts where you have fragmented societies, fragmented labor markets, no clear mechanism of representation and participation, in such context, you have to be more creative and perhaps first try to focus on creating these enabling conditions for dialogue and implement and setting up this dialogue mechanism, and then thinking about embedding this mechanism into sector-focused reforms like the business environment reforms. As for the conclusion and lessons, I think it would be interesting for the DCED to explore the cross-cutting connections between social dialogue and other topics that are addressed through this working group, including informality, gender, and the environment, and so on. Because I think that there are some very interesting insights that could be learned at the intersection of all these topics. The second point is the importance of data, especially the monitoring framework, as we have to come up at the end of the day with something that assesses the performance of the interventions. And in such a context, I think that there are also a need for some metrics to assess the contribution of social dialogue, among other intervention and coordination frameworks. Thank you.
Thank you. Merci, Alexandre. Natasha and Lucas, I mean, whoever wants to go first in terms of, taking forward or what next.
Thank you. I'll take my 30 seconds. Just wanted to answer or see the question on social protection and the relation. Maybe just think about the 4 dimension of the decent work agenda, which is the social dialogue, to reinforce social dialogue, to create jobs, to guarantee the right of works, and to extend social protection. So these 4 really goes hand in hand. And this is something we are seeing day after day, for instance, here in Tunisia, when the discussions with the FDI, with the banks is to reduce the subsidies, but how can you do it if you don't raise up the social protection? So really to, in other words, otherwise this country will fall apart. So this will always go together, these 4 dimensions for the decent work. But coming back to the question on what we can, I think the strength of this report provided by Alexandre is really it's the change of perspective, and it's the audience that it tackles. It tackles the business community, right? And the business communities, they define themselves as businessmen or businesswomen. But here, so they change the perspective, so they can see themselves not as a businesswoman, but as an employer's representative. And this it changes their way of thinking, because they have an obligation also for their employees. They have also an interest, and a lobby interest, which is natural. They need to grow their business, and they need to interlink with the decision makers at the public side, at the state level. So basically, this change of perspective, I think this is the strength of this report.
Oops, thank you. No, I wasn't muted. Thank you very much, Natasha. Yeah.
There is nothing much to be added. I really like to thank Alexander for the very comprehensive report, for capturing the strengths of the social dialogue and how it can contribute to the business environment reforms and further business developments. Nothing much to say. I would like just to thank you for this opportunity, and once again for inviting me to this webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you all, and we are just 3 minutes behind schedule, but yeah, now it's my turn to really thank all the speakers, Alexandre, Natasha and Lucas, obviously, and also Jim, Ella, Stefan, Beate and Swari, who were also in the back to make sure that that these webinars happen, and that the report, and that we are learning from the case studies and from the discussions. There's a last question from Edward, and whether we can share some readings. We would certainly need your email address to do that. I'm not sure whether you can put it into chat before we close the webinar, but yeah, thank you so much, and have a good rest of the afternoon. Thank you very much. Bye, everybody.